ladies and gentlemen, let's kick off the afternoon with our 12 Legacy Series introduction, which is pretty much the highlight of the Congress, where we have some inspiring speakers. And for the first time in the history of the World Zoroastrian Youth Congress, the 6th one which we have over here in New Zealand, this is the first time we're ever introducing 12 Legacy Series. The purpose of these series is showcasing all of the legacy of selected Zoroastrian individuals, families and organizations who've made a remarkable impact and difference in our community all around the world, as well as humanity. The number 12 has been selected to represent the spirit of ASHA from the 12 words of Zerbanoo. The Legacy Series introduces the fabulous contribution of our senior generation and our future generation coming through, inspiring today's Zoroastrian youth to continue striving, achieving and succeeding in the same way. So the series is really made up of some really prominent names. The ASHA Centre Legacy in the UK, the Serum Institute of India and Dr. Cyrus S. Poonawalla Legacy in India, the Nadir and Rati Godrej Legacy in India, the Joki Family Legacy in Hong Kong, the Shapraji Balaji and Company Private Limited Legacy in India, the Zartoshni Brothers Legacy from the UK, the Dabistani Brothers Legacy in Iran, the Khorshid Jundalwala Legacy from the USA, the Pervez Rustamji Legacy from USA, the Din Shalbi Awari Legacy from Pakistan, the Farangis Sharok Legacy from Iran, and the Dr. Farhan Meher Legacy from Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, if you allow a round of applause for all our legacy speakers today. The organizing committee would like to thank each legacy donor for their generous contribution, bringing the series to life, one of which we are lucky enough to have here with us today for the very first time at the 6th World Zoroastrian Youth Congress. It gives me great pleasure for our first legacy donor and our special guest, Mrs. Zerbanoo Gifford. Ladies and gentlemen. We start with the video presentation. A lady who's been very close to her life, the author of the book, which we revealed yesterday. Can I please call Mrs. Master on stage, please? Mrs. Farida Master, ladies and gentlemen. She'll be saying a few words and we'll be starting with our first legacy session, followed by the video. Mrs. Master, please.
Hi everyone. Thank you for coming here after a lovely meal. I know you guys would have rather go back to your rooms and have a good snooze. But I promise that we can make it as interesting as possible. I've had the privilege of writing this biography, and I wanted to tell you that apart from all the wonderful things we read about Zerbanoo yesterday, it's not like she's going to have sainthood bestowed on her. So there are lots of funny and interesting anecdotes in this book, which are also truly inspiring. Anecdotes that act like a spark plug. So I won't say any more, but just get on to it. One of the things I do believe that every leader needs is a sense of vision, a sense of fearlessness, the sense of courage and the ability to think on their feet. And whilst writing the biography, I realized that Zerbanoo has all of that in good store. One of the anecdotes that particularly made me have a good laugh was this one. It was narrated by her godmother, Mappy Ghatikara, wife of Air Marshal Edgar Ghatikara, and a treasured friend of Zerbanoo's mother. So this anecdote happened in the late 80s when they were traveling in a tourist bus in Kashmir. In her words, suddenly our bus came to a screeching halt. We were taken unawares as a group of men with guns jumped into the bus and threatened us with dire consequences. Everyone froze with fear, given the tense situation in Kashmir at that time. But Zerbanoo's mind was ticking fast. Keeping her cool, she realized she had to act quickly to save the other passengers. Somehow she realized that the men were not prone to attacking women and children. She also surmised that they probably could not read. It was a now or never moment. Running from the back of the bus where she was sitting, Zerbanoo looked at the hooded men squarely and dramatically whisked her golden business card from her bag. Brandishing it in the air, she shouted confidently, "Do you know who I am?" The masked men were taken aback. They were wondering, what she was up to. Thank God her bluff worked. The terrorists looked quite puzzled as they passed the embossed card amongst themselves. I'm not quite sure what went through their minds, but much to everyone's relief, they got off and waved the bus off. Zerbanoo's extraordinary courage saved the day and our lives. Some years later, in an editorial in the Times of India, Bachi Karkaria labeled Zerbanoo as an AK-47 with red nail polish. Maybe the bandits instinctively realized that themselves and decided to let us go. So just the ability to think on her feet, but apart from that, having a sense of vision and compassion at a very early age is what also appealed to me. And there's a little anecdote that illustrates that. So Zerbanoo was living in the city of Pune till she was 4 years old before she moved to London. So this is after she just moved to London. Before moving to London, Zerbanoo had been affected by the sight of children begging on the streets of Pune. Encouraged to think for herself, she decided to do something to help the deprived children of India. The fact that she was in faraway London hardly seemed to matter. Working on her plan, 7-year-old Zerbanoo asked Mappy, her godmother, who in those days worked for the Queen's couturier, Hardy Amy's, for some fabric and pins. Mappy watched with fascination as Zerbanoo deftly created little flags with pins and scraps of fabric. Hours later, she stepped out on the pavement outside her family home, the Heritage Hotel in London, and stopped every passerby, offering them a flag in return for a penny. Her enterprise was successful. Soon, she had raised £10. Without wasting time, she sealed the money in an envelope and posted it to the official residence of the then Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. Not long after, she received a letter from the Indian Prime Minister's office. The letter acknowledged her act of kindness, as Pandit Nehru wrote a thank you letter to her saying, "If every girl in England was like you, there would be fewer poor children in Pune." Years later, Zerbanoo received the Nehru Centenary Award for her work championing the rights of women, children, and minorities. This award is presented to Indians for their outstanding contribution to the promotion of international understanding. I also wanted to share with you the fact that at the age of 21, Zerbanoo fell in love at her 21st birthday party with a young British lawyer, Richard Gifford. But of course, her father wouldn't hear of it because he was even the founder of the WZYC, and like every good Zoroastrian parent, he wanted his daughter to marry a Zoroastrian. Zerbanoo and Richard decided to wait, and she went to India and Iran to see young boys and see whether how the matchmaking thing works. Of course, there were no congresses at that time or nothing of the sort, so she didn't have really an opportunity to meet very many people. But when Richard went and asked Bailey for his daughter's hand in marriage, Bailey told Richard, "I want to tell you a story about the Persian tale about the proverbial eagle and the dove that flew happily together. However, when the eagle was hungry, it pounced on the dove and polished it off." A little baffled by the outcome of the story, Richard, in all earnestness, assured his potential father-in-law that his intentions were perfectly honorable. He said he'd never be the eagle who would hurt his daughter in any way, to which Bailey Gifford laughed aloud, saying, "You fool, you're not the eagle, she is." So, Bailey explained to Richard that considering his ancestors had kept their faith alive through a millennium of religious persecution, he would never permit his daughter to marry outside the faith. After giving it some thought, Bailey asked Richard to delay the marriage so that they could be sure of their love. Richard agreed. In the meanwhile, Zerbanoo traveled to India and Iran discreetly in search of a suitable boy who belonged to her own race and religion. However, when they got married, Zerbanoo missed her father's presence at the wedding. But after they were married, Bailey occasionally wished that Richard was an eccentric Zoroastrian instead of a perfect Englishman, he finally accepted him in the family fold. Regardless of Richard's genealogy, Bailey was shrewd enough to know that it helped to have a lawyer in the family who could aid him with the legalities of the properties he owned. That too without charging a penny. Word was that Bailey kept a secret stash of Richard's legal correspondence that he thought was brilliant. Bailey would discreetly read his son-in-law's legal letters over and over again to grasp the finer nuances of Richard's cleverly worded communication with his clients. Despite marrying outside the community, Zerbanoo strongly recommends that every young Zoroastrian should marry within the folds of the ancient religion to continue being the flag bearers of the proud race. The irony of it all was when one of his Zoroastrian girlfriends living in London called up to have a chat. I was there, and in the midst of the conversation she let slip that she was afraid to inform Zerbanoo about her son dating an English girl. Only because I know how strongly you feel about the issue of marrying outside the community, she said by way of explanation. I guess that says it all. I wanted to give you a tiny brief about the ASHA Center. I don't know whether most of you all are aware of the ASHA Center, the leadership center in the Forest of Dean that Zerbanoo has started. She was a part of British politics for almost 15 years, and when she felt that she couldn't make the change that she wanted to do, she decided that we can be the change and started this beautiful center, which I recommend each one of you should visit because it's literally like heaven on earth. I can see some people nodding over there, so those who've already been there. It's a must-see and you have to be there. But apart from having leadership courses over there, they also work on theatre and leadership through theatre. And one of the unique things that they did was they even got groups of Jewish students and Palestinian students together and made them act in a play and, working towards peace. So I'll read a little bit from here, which says, "The script for Arabian Nights was riddled with plenty of real-life subplots that made the journey an unforgettable one. The Jewish boys and girls were much more liberal in comparison to the Arabs. Alexander, her son, narrated an episode that illustrated how protective and possessive the Arab boys were of the Arab girls. One of the Arab boys fell in love with a Jewish girl. It was tough for all of us. There was an incident when some of the Arab boys took out their knives to threaten the Jewish boys. Fortunately, we had an ex-army commander with us who separated the two groups. We had to abandon rehearsals that day and worked on conflict resolution, but it was an important part of the process. These productions were not only successful artistic achievements, but made a poignant social statement. When Arabian Nights was performed in Israel, community leaders and Israeli press regarded it as the most meaningful contribution to peace in the region for decades. the first time, young Arabs and Jews performed together on stage, watched by families who would otherwise not come within miles of each other. In an article that appeared in the Times, Avital Zohar, a 17-year-old Jewish girl, is quoted as saying, "I was really happy when the Muslims joined in with our Sabbath prayers over Friday dinner at the ASHA Center. So from barely speaking to each other at the beginning of the rehearsals, the two groups became a cohesive company, bringing laughter, joy, and understanding to the audience." Quickly end with a small aside that kind of talks about Zerbanoo's sense of fun and naughtiness. Zerbanoo was attending, she'd gone to America, she was invited over there, and there she was attending the television awards ceremony in Los Angeles. Sitting at the table reserved for the glitterati of the long-running American TV soap opera Dallas, she sensed that Patrick Duffy, who played the oil tycoon Bobby Ewing, and the other StarCast members were curious to find out who she was. Zerbanoo wasn't about to tell them that she had asked to be seated at the table so that she could have a picture with them, posing with Bobby to use in a forthcoming 1987 general election campaign in Britain. Zerbanoo smiled sweetly, and with a tongue in cheek she said, "I am the princess of Zoroastrian." Everyone felt good, and obviously geography was, not the strong point, so they all treated her like the royal princess. Before I end, just wanted to share a very small incident that was difficult for me to write in this book, but which is there in the prelude of this book, and it involves my daughter Sanaya. As I went to England to write this biography, Sanaya was going to follow later and, be there at the ASHA Center as a volunteer and, just experience it. She arrived at the Heathrow Airport, but we just didn't hear from her, and the person who had gone to pick her up said she just didn't step out of the airport. And hours ticked by, and we didn't know what had happened to Sanaya. Zerbanoo's husband, Richard, is an immigration lawyer as well, and he called up immigration to find out, and they said, yes, she's been detained, but we'll see what we can do, and they gave no answer. Sanaya had arrived at 11 in the morning, and hours ticked by, and it was almost evening when we heard that she was going to be put back on a flight to India, to Amritsar and Delhi, a place that she knew nothing about, since she had gone on a holiday to India and then she was coming to England. Zerbanoo and I rushed to the airport, asked everyone desperate for help, and everybody said there's nothing they could do, but there was a public phone in the corner, and they said, try that. If somebody comes on the line, good luck. I held onto the phone for 45 minutes. I wanted to put it down because, it just had that engaged tone. And Zerbanoo wouldn't allow me to put the phone down. She said, and there was this long serpentine queue behind us, of impatient people wanting us to hang up the phone. Finally, after 55 minutes, somebody comes on the line and says, I'm sorry, the person who was handling this case has left for the day. Zerbanoo was furious, and I don't know whether it was the power in her tone or how she got it done, but she pinned the guy down and she said, if you do not take responsibility for this, it's going to be an international incident tomorrow. I want that girl off the aircraft, because in the meanwhile, Sanaya was escorted by security personnel in the aircraft. She was sitting, the doors had closed. The aircraft was about to take off, and then the flight attendant appeared from nowhere and said, I think somebody's waiting for you outside. And so Sanaya just jumped and ran out and jumped out of the aircraft. And that's the time I knew there was a very good reason I was writing this biography. because if there was one person who could stop an international flight from taking off, it was Zerbanoo Gifford. She was Sanaa's heroine, and she is the heroine of this book. So with that, I hand over the mic to Zerbanoo. Thank you.
Legend has it that when the prophet Zarathustra was born, he laughed. He had come into the world to bring joy and wisdom. Zarathustra was the world's first game changer. He influenced the way that people today understand the importance of justice, living a good life, and bringing happiness to others. He was the inspiration for his Zoroastrian followers, who with their enterprise, generosity of spirit, and sheer vitality have changed our world for the better. Zerbanoo Gifford is just one Zoroastrian who symbolises her illustrious community. Her life and achievements are both extraordinary and yet typical of her heritage. She has taken the Zoroastrian traditions of public service, philanthropy, and fighting for others' rights, and combined them with the modern imperatives of sustainable living, women's empowerment, and the freeing of young people from past religious or political hatreds to live magnificent lives, which is their real destiny. Zerbanoo has come from a long line of die-hard Zoroastrians. Her grandfather, Shahpur Mazda, left his home in Yazd in Iran and walked for 4 years, arriving in Bombay, where he sold tea on the roadside. Later, he married the feisty Zerbanoo Irani and left for Calcutta, where he created a business empire and was given the title Khan Bahadur for his philanthropy. His daughter, Zerbanoo's mother Kitty, married her childhood sweetheart Bailey. Bailey's mother, Gavair, had also emigrated to India from Iran as a young refugee before marrying Rustam Irani of Pune. Bailey dedicated his life to his community. He was president and trustee of the Zoroastrian Trust Funds of Europe and the founder-president of the World Zoroastrian Organization that was launched in Tehran in the 1960s. Bailey lived his life with great generosity, a wicked sense of humour and hard work, building a hotel business in London. Zerbanoo was born in Calcutta and at the age of 3.5 came to live with her parents in England, where she was educated and later met her husband Richard, a human rights lawyer, to whom she's been happily married for over 42 years. They have 2 sons, Mark Mazda and Alexander Justice. Zerbanoo has dedicated her life to making our interconnected world a more just, more beautiful and peaceful one. And like so many Zoroastrians, Zerbanoo is unable to let inequality remain unchallenged. Fighting evil in its many ugly forms is in the DNA of every Zoroastrian. Their heritage of noble action and universal charity was the spur for Zerbanoo to stand for public office in 1982. Zerbanoo's election victory gave her another platform for her courage and determination to take on injustice and intolerance. She has dedicated herself to women's empowerment, interfaith understanding, and the eradication of modern-day slavery, especially child labour. As director of the oldest human rights organisation in the world, Anti-Slavery International, Zerbanoo brought to the world's attention the pressing need to end modern slavery. Zerbanoo was also involved with the anti-apartheid movement, being chosen to take the People's Petition to number 10 Downing Street, calling for full mandatory sanctions against the racist regime in South Africa and the release of Nelson Mandela. In all the books Zerbanoo has authored, she has championed the achievements and noble campaigns of heroes and heroines who deserve acclaim. In 2004, Zerbanoo was awarded a Nestor Fellowship for the National Endowment Science, Technology and the Arts, for which she interviewed and wrote about over 300 women from 60 countries, whose inspirational lives have changed our world. In 2012, Zerbanoo created the Z Factor exhibition to highlight the achievements of Zoroastrian changemakers, whose vision, industry and immense courage she draws inspiration from. Undoubtedly, Zerbanoo's greatest achievement has been the founding of the ASHA Centre in the Forest of Dean in England, a charity working for the empowerment of young people, sustainable development and peace and reconciliation worldwide. Young people from all over the world, including places torn apart by conflict and war, come to the ASHA Centre to experience each other's cultures and celebrate their shared humanity. ASHA is a place of safety and inspiring beauty, where people of all nationalities and religions live and work side by side and learn the joys of service. Theatre is used at ASHA as a means to peace and social cohesion. Plays are produced with young people across cultural, religious and racial divides. These are performed in Britain as well as internationally. Young Arab and Jewish Israelis created plays together at ASHA, which they took back to their homeland in an effort to bring together their divided communities, described in the Israeli media as a major contribution to peace building in the region. Young South Africans from the townships of Johannesburg devised plays at ASHA, which later toured Britain and South Africa, one of which was presented to Nelson Mandela at his home. With its biodynamic fruit and vegetable gardens, ASHA offers regular courses on sustainable living to young people interested in respecting our environment and leading a more holistic and healthy lifestyle. In putting all these principles into practice, the ASHA Centre is a living example of modern Zoroastrianism in action. It is a place where our human connection with the natural world is honoured, where the cultivation and beautifying of the earth mirrors and supports the development of our own selves, and where our active engagement in the world forms the basis of our own spiritual development.
Can we do a Maori tradition and just for 1 second just ask our Master for his blessings this afternoon? I feel terribly privileged to be here. I'm with fellow leaders of the Zoroastrian community. I can't tell you how shocked everybody at the ASHA Centre was when I told them that I was going to go halfway around the world. They had a good giggle about it because a couple of weeks before then I'd been rung up by the editor of the Gloucestershire newspapers and was told by her that she had heard through the grapevine that Adele was hiding out at the ASHA Centre. I told her I had no idea who Adele was. I went across the street to see her. The editor the next morning put in the front page of the newspaper, Zerbanoo wouldn't cross the street to see Adele, but she was at the ASHA Centre. I promise you Adele wasn't there, but I have seen her since then, and I think I would cross the street to see her. And I would certainly have crossed half the world to be here with you all today. I want to thank you for also being here. Destiny somehow allows us to be with certain people at certain times. Life isn't haphazard, and there's always a reason why you're there and why you meet people. You don't understand it at the moment, and sometimes it takes years and years for that to click into place, why it happens. I just want to give you a very short story about myself. I have a bleeding complaint. My parents are first cousins, and my mother always says to me, we Zoroastrians are either very, very brilliant or very crackpotty, eccentric. Our genes are so strong because we've always been intermarried. And I have a bleeding complaint, which you can't see, but I do have it. So if I hurt myself or cut myself, it takes me, I just don't heal. I don't cut myself, I don't fall over, I don't bruise myself. But on one occasion, I'd gone up with Richard to see Mark at university. He wanted his drums, and we'd driven up to Durham, where he was doing his first degree in theology. And I started bleeding, just hemorrhaging. So we drove back to the Royal Free Hospital, and it was a Saturday night, casualty, and there were all these sort of drunks all over the place. And we were told there was no beds for me, even though I was a registered patient at the Royal Free, which has the largest haematology department in Europe. We were told, Mommy, Jeannie, my brothers and sisters, everybody arrived, and we were told that I had to go back home because they said I couldn't live. And then out of the blue, a young nurse turned up, and she said to Mummy, "Is this Zerbanoo Gifford?" And Mummy said, "There's no other Zerbanoo Gifford in the world." And she said, "Okay." They found me a bed. They had platelets flown in by helicopter from Birmingham. And I had a near-death experience, but I did live. And my mother always says, you throw your bread upon the water and it comes back to you. There's such a thing as karma. What you do, and this is why our community is so powerful, even though there's so few of us, is because we do good things. 15 years earlier, I had been a counsellor in Harrow, and this nurse had been fostered. And at that time, politicians weren't allowed to give scholarships to women to do nursing. If you became a doctor, you could get a grant, but not to be a nurse. And I was completely incensed by that. I remember council meeting getting up and actually saying I would refuse to go home till the council agreed to give this girl a special scholarship. And especially since she didn't have parents and she was being fostered to become a nurse. It turned out the nurse that saved my life was the girl who got the scholarship. I just love our religion, and I think the greatest change maker in the world is our prophet. This morning we heard Jimmy speak about our prophet, and I want to say thank you to Jimmy. He knows I just love him very much. One of the greatest moments of my life was when we had a Zoroastrian wedding at the ASHA Centre. We have every summer young Zoroastrians that come, mostly from Britain and Europe. And of course they come to meet each other, to get married, we hope. And on this occasion, the marriage was an Irani and a Parsi. And Jimmy did the prayers with an Iranian dastur, and it was wonderful. And Jimmy, I'm not going to allow anybody to say my prayers when I die except you. So I'm giving you notice now. I think you're a totally exceptional human being, and I love you dearly. I've never met the other Jimmy, and I want to say to him too, I love you very much. When you were talking about Rosa Parks, she's one of my heroines. Goosebumps went down my back. When I was a little girl, I found it very difficult to learn my Zoroastrian prayers. And so Mummy, Papa and my granny, and Maggie, my darling godmother, we all went on a trip to America on a Greyhound bus. And during the long journeys, and I was continuously sick, I'm the worst traveller in the world, Papa used to teach me my Zoroastrian prayers. And every time we stopped, especially in the southern states, you'd see that this was in the early 50s, there were separate toilets for blacks, separate water fountains for blacks, separate restaurants for blacks. And I remember actually, as a young girl, and I think I was about 6 years old, Mommy says, I absolutely refused to go to the white toilets. I absolutely refused to allow them to go to the white restaurants. And of course, in those days, Indians were treated in the southern states as whites. And I've often looked back on that, and I think that's one of the reasons that I've fought against racism. And I think it comes back from my ancestors, because my grandfather and grandmother used to tell me about the terrible persecution they suffered in Iran, and how they were treated as untouchables. And I think that DNA stays with you. You don't like to see it exhibited anywhere in the world. And that's why I've taken part in campaigns for anti-apartheid. And I have to say, one of the greatest living Zoroastrians, Freni Jinwala, who you might have heard of, lives in South Africa. And I met her when I was working for the ANC in London. She actually headed the whole of the ANC movement outside South Africa. Freni then went on to be the first speaker in the new South African Parliament, and she is a great, great Zoroastrian. She dedicated her life to fighting racism. When she was in London, she very kindly told me to get in my car and come to meet Old Man and Becky. Now, Old Man and Becky had been in prison with Mandela for over 27 years. And I remember it was just him, myself, Richard and Freni having lunch together in London in Freni's house. And at that time I was doing a lot of writing, and I remember saying to him, to Governor Mbeki, how did you manage to fight and to keep going for 27 years? And he looked at me and he said, you know, it used to be so cold on Robben Island that we couldn't go to sleep. We didn't have any blankets. We'd have to exercise for at least 2 hours a night to get the heat in our bodies to be able to sleep. And he said, we ate nothing but porridge. But he said, on the 12th year, we were given a slice of bread on my birthday. And I remember writing an article saying, man doesn't live by bread alone. And I've been so fortunate to have met most extraordinary people like Governor Becky. And I was absolutely thrilled when he told me that in Mandela's room, he had photographs up of all the people that were supporting the struggle. And he used to look at them every night before he went to sleep, because he knew that they hadn't been forgotten. And one of those photographs was mine, which I just didn't know about. And he had a photograph of myself and Bishop Trevor Huddleston, who were chosen to present the People's Petition to 10 Downing Street to Mrs. Thatcher, calling for full mandatory sanctions against South Africa and the release of Mandela. And he kept that photograph up just so he knew that there was solidarity with those that suffer in the world. So I'm very grateful to Jimmy for making me remember those days, because I'm so now involved in the ASHA Centre that I'm just sort of wheeled out for special occasions as a buddhi and then sent back to my flat. So I don't really go out so much these days, but there's one story which I think you all enjoy very much. One of the remarkable things I think about Zoroastrian, I know when I met Professor Mary Boyce, she said that she made the statement that the religion that Zoroaster preached to the world has had more influence directly and indirectly on other faiths than any other religion. And if you actually look at it, and if you study interfaith and a part of the interfaith movement like I am, you realize that greatness is about influence. It's not about numbers. It's about how you influence people to be better. And there's a lovely story about how you have to justify yourself. And Zoroaster said some extraordinary things. The first thing he said was that you have to live an ethical life, which we all know. You have to conserve the environment, you have to beautify it. You're here to sustain the world. He spoke about equality, which is so of the moment. It's the zeitgeist. Everybody's talking about equality. He spoke about it 4,000, 6,000. I don't know when he was born, but wherever he was, women were the forgotten sex, and he spoke about equality. He spoke about charity, and I don't have to tell you how charitable our community is. If I tell you about a third very famous Jimmy, Jamshid Marker, who the Pakistanis from Zoroastrians will know who he is, he's in the Guinness Book of Records. He's held more positions as an ambassador around the world than anybody else. He's also been chairing the Security Council. And I used to always go and stay with Jamshid and Anas in America, both in Washington, when he was in Washington, and in New York. And I remember telling Anas I wanted to meet Helen Gurley Brown. Now, for those who don't know who Helen Gurley Brown is, she was the founder of Cosmopolitan magazine. I had just been chosen as a Woman of Today by Cosmo, and so I wanted to meet this legendary Helen Gurley Brown, who had been, I think, voted in America as the 5th most inspirational woman that had ever lived. And so I went to Cosmo buildings, and Helen agreed to see me because of the markers. And I remember going in, and she just started giggling, and she was this high, as thin as a stick. She must have been size 8. She looked like a sort of 12-year-old schoolgirl, although she was in her 80s. And she didn't stop giggling. And I sort of looked at her. She said, "You're the 3rd endangered species I've ever met. I met Anas, and I met Jamshid, now I met you." And she said to me, "You know, you're very unique." So I smiled and I thought, what a charming lady. And she said, no, you're very unique, you Zoroastrians. So I said, really? She said, yes. She said, God's given us all hearts, but he's given you Zoroastrians golden hearts. And I thought, yes, that is what we've all got. We've got golden hearts. I mean, we're known the world over for our charity and our philanthropy. And it's done quietly and done with such grace. And it's never forgotten. And I thought, what a lovely thing she said. And then I said to her, Helen, I've just received a Nestor Fellowship in Britain, and I'm interviewing inspirational women around the world, and I want to know their secret. What is your secret? And she said to me, when I was 12, my father got killed between two doors in a lift. And she said, I was left with a mother who really was unable to work and had no confidence to do anything, and a sister who had polio. And she said, I desperately wanted to have education, I desperately wanted to go to university. I couldn't do anything, I had to go and work to support my mother and sister. And she said, I used to go and work as a secretary, because in those days women could only be nurses or secretaries. And she said, every day the concierge would open the door for me, and every day I'd say thank you to him. And then some weeks later I said to him, why do you always open the door for me? And he smiled and he said, we men have closed so many doors for women, it's about time one man opened a door for another woman. And she said, I was so touched that I went home that evening and I wrote him a letter thanking him. And she said, he continued to open the door for me every morning. And then a couple of months later, he said, Helen, there's a job coming up in another firm on the 3rd floor of this office block. Why don't you apply for the job? It's for a script writer. And he said, no woman has ever applied to do this job, but I think you can do it. And Helen said, you know, she felt so nervous. But she decided she would apply for the job because the man was so kind to her and she didn't want to let him down. And the rest is history. She got the job and the rest is history. She changed the way that young women behave around the world, and she started a magazine empire. But what she taught me from that little story was that you have to say thank you. And I want to say thank you, not just to all of you for being here, but I want to thank Tanaz and the complete team that's put this together, because it's magnificent to be able to get all these young Zoroastrians from around the world to come here. And I want to say thank you, and I think we should just have a small clap to them all. I also want to thank Farida. How she came into my life is just extraordinary. Nothing in life, I tell you, as a Buddhi, is haphazard. It's always meant to happen. And she telephoned me from New Zealand some years back and said she was doing an article on famous Zoroastrians and could she interview me? I said, that's fine. And she interviewed me and the article came out. It was very nice and very well written. And then some months later she rang and said, I've asked the Cosmos to give me a great challenge. Can I write your biography? I was in England and I said, yeah. I said, it sounds unbelievable. Why don't you just get on the plane and come over? And that's exactly what she did. She did it. She didn't procrastinate. Zoroastrians don't procrastinate. We just do. We're doers. She came over and she spent 3 months with me. I said to her, I can't be with you all day, but there's an attic in my flat with all the political archives for over 60 years, and every evening when I come back from work, of course we can talk, and she was like my shrink. I didn't have to pay her, but she would ask me questions, and some of them were very, very painful for me. Things I wanted to forget, things in politics, and she pulled out a letter which I'd completely forgotten about, written from one of the most powerful women in British politics, telling me that if I didn't stop campaigning against paedophilia, my political campaign and my political life would be very short-lived. And I'd completely forgotten about that. And it made me think, well, 30 years later we have legislation in Britain, and it's now a major topic of conversation, so it was worth fighting for. In the evenings, we used to go and walk by the River Severn. Now, the River Severn is near the ASHA Centre, and it's the longest river in England. But much more importantly, it's the only river that on certain occasions, at high tide and equinox, it goes backwards. It breaks the rules of science. And Frida said I was like the River Severn, I broke the rules, but I think all we Zoroastrians are like the River Severn. I break the rules. because we know that the status quo is not fair. We know that the way the power in the world is not fair. It's not right, as the MP said yesterday, that 85 people own the same amount of money as 3.5 billion people. It's not right that one man should spend over £1 billion building a house when that is the whole GDP of Somalia. It's not right that there should be double the population of England that are still in slavery. And I think those are the challenges that are ahead of you. The greatest thing that Zoroaster taught the world, I think, was two things. One was that we have guardian angels, and we have people looking after us, and you can call on them to help you. And I have seen them. I saw my two guardian angels at the Agyari in Rwanda. I had taken the British government to court because they promised that I could build an ASHA centre in London, and I'd been promised £10 million in land and all sorts of things. And when the dome went pear-shaped, they broke their word. And Richard and I decided to take them to court, which was no mean feat to take the British government to court. We took them to court, and we were told by our lawyers that we would lose because they had affidavits from civil servants saying that I had lied about what I was going to do. And on the fourth day of the court case, and the judge Neuberger, and I knew his sister-in-law Julia Neuberger, Baroness Neuberger, very well, and he was sitting there, and one of the witnesses was disabled, and he was the head of the civil service that dealt with access to land and giving land. And my youngest son had seen that nobody was offering him coffee, and he'd gone to get him some coffee, and he gave it to this gentleman, and the gentleman said, that's going to cost the British government. He got up in court, and I don't know where he got the courage from, but I remember sitting there and praying to God. And I had Lucy Bedwar next to me, our Dustu, and I said, start praying. I said, I'm losing my confidence. I think we're going to lose. The man got up, and he stood up in court, and he said, I signed an affidavit, I was forced, and I lied. And he said, Mrs. Gifford has never lied in her life. And then he said, Zoroastrian, she is a Zoroastrian. And he said, Zoroastrians don't lie. And that was the end of the case. I'm not allowed to tell you the whole story of what happened because we had to take an undertaking to the court not to divulge what happened to safeguard the British government. We did win. I also took the Millennium Commission to court, which is the lottery board. The lottery board in England has a statutory duty to give money to the population in its percentage. And during the millennium, billions of pounds were given out, and they were very conscious that money wasn't going to the minorities or to women's groups. They had promised that they would give the ASHA Centre £10 million, and we were on their website, and then they pulled the plug on us. And I was absolutely incensed. I thought that was completely wrong. If we were one of their main projects and we were on the website, and I had given up my job in anti-slavery, I was the director of Anti-Slavery International, which is the oldest human rights organisation in the world, and I'd been asked by the government to help bring all the minority communities and all the faith communities together, which I did. And then to be just had the plug pulled on you wasn't right. I took them to court and I lost. But they came out of court, and I remember Dad said to me, you know, you play the game, win or lose, you know, but you have the courage, you've done it. And they came out of court and they made an announcement that the Millennium Commission had found another £30 million only for minority communities. So before court they said they didn't have any money to give the minorities. Suddenly they found £30 million. They asked me to reapply for the money, and I did reapply. But of course, as you can imagine, every organisation got money except for the ASHA Foundation. Politicians are so predictable. I knew they'd blackball us. But it did make me very happy to think that so many other organisations, through our courage, got money to do what they wanted to do and to fulfil their dreams. It was very important to me. Now, I think the thing that really keeps me going is the knowledge which Zoroaster really gave to the world, which I think everybody knows in their heart of hearts, that there will be a day of judgment, and you will have to face your Maker, and you will have to experience all the happiness you've given to other people, but you will also have to experience all the unhappiness you've given, and all the misery you've caused other people. And there's a lovely story which I have to share with you. It's about justifying your life. And it takes place on a jumbo jet that's crossing the Atlantic. And on board the plane is the Pope, the President of the United States of America, Mrs. Thatcher, who was the first woman Prime Minister of Britain, and a young woman hitchhiker. And the plane starts to nosedive. There's something that's going wrong. And on board the plane there are only 3 parachutes. And everybody has to justify why they should be saved. And the President of the United States turns around, grabs a parachute, jumps out of the plane and says, "I'm the most powerful man in the world, I have to be saved." And before anybody could say anything, Mrs. Thatcher grabs one, jumps out of the plane and says, "I'm the most brilliant woman in the world, I've got to be saved." And the Pope looks at the young woman hitchhiker and says, "My daughter, you're the future of the world. Please take the last parachute and please save yourself. You have so much to do. I will stay up here and I will pray for you." And the young hitchhiker looks at the Pope and says, "Father, I don't know who the most brilliant woman in the world was, but she's just jumped out of my haversack." So, I have to tell you that I've had a fascinating life like the hitchhiker. I'm not the most powerful woman, I'm not the most brilliant, and I'm certainly not the most holy. But I have lived a wonderful life. I have been blessed by the Pope. I went to Rome and he blessed the ASHA Centre. And I want to tell you all that today in the Catholic Cathedral in Singapore they're praying for us. One of the most outstanding Singaporeans is a lady called Cecily Parvery. Her father was a dastu who was so poor that he had to go to China, and he worked in the mines in China. And this is before Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong. And he took a Chinese bride, and they had 7 children. And Cecily is their youngest daughter, and she is the sort of #1 educationist in Singapore. She runs a school. And while I was there just a few days ago, we went to the botanical gardens, and literally every 100 yards we'd be stopped, and somebody would stop us and say, "Sister Parvery, do you not remember me? You taught me." And I just thought how wonderful. And she told me about how they escaped from China. Because her father was Zoroastrian, he wasn't allowed to work during the communist regime. And it was the dastu in Hong Kong that helped them escape to Hong Kong, and then the dastus in Singapore that helped them escape to Singapore. Of course, I was given a fantastic dinner by the Zorros in Singapore. But the funniest thing was that when we were on the plane coming here, we had the captain said, "This is Captain Farrow's contractor." And my husband just couldn't stop laughing. He said, "You even have a Zorro flying you to Auckland." When we got to the airport, there was this ridiculous queue, and we were all sort of bordering on threatened that we mustn't bring in any vegetables or this or that. And I was thinking, why do these people think we're carrying vegetables and fruits? And anyway, we were right at the end of the queue, and I was saying, oh God, people know during lunch I queue barge. I don't like queues. And this gentleman came up to me, all dressed up, an immigration officer, obviously quite high up, and he said, are you an Iranian? So I said to him, my grandfather came from Yaz. So he said, come with me. So he took Richard and myself, and we went right to the head of the queue, and he said, I will take care of you. And he stamped our passports, and he said to me, are you a Parsi? So I said, yes, I was born in India, I was Zoroastrian Parsi. He said, He said, fantastic. So he said, what are you coming here for? So I told him I was coming to the conference, and he said, oh, I don't know anything about that. So anyway, we then had to go through, and our bags were x-rayed. Our bags were opened. We'd got bottles in our bags. So I said to the woman who was looking at them, I said, oh, one's got a bottle of shampoo and it's nothing, it's not. Anyway, in my husband's case, there was a pate that I bought in the south of France for Farida. And I'd forgotten that I'd hidden it in his suitcase. I didn't want to carry it away, so I pushed it in his suitcase. And he was seething. They opened up his suitcase, and he was sort of going red in the face and fury because he won't do anything that isn't proper. And anyway, the same Iranian immigration man came up, and he said, he said, what's this? So I said, oh God. I put it in my husband's case, and he's seething. And he turned to the customs officer, and he said, she's a Zoroastrian. She wouldn't lie. That's pate. He closed the bag, and we walked through. So, reputation and integrity is everything. Anyway, I get into the car, and the story doesn't end there. I get into the car, and I've got this obsession for news. And I've sort of been deprived of 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock news. And so I say to Richard's cousins, who we're driving to stay with in Cambridge, have you got a newspaper? We're sort of desperate, I need a newspaper. So they hand me a newspaper. The front page of the newspaper is about a Dr. Rusi Chikosi. And his daughter has just been appointed a Solicitor General in New Zealand. So here's a Parsi gentleman whose daughter has really got the highest law position in New Zealand, and that's the first thing I read when I arrive in New Zealand. And it doesn't end there. We get to Cambridge, and as we're going to the house, there's a polo match on. So I say, I've got to watch this, I love polo. And they all start giggling and saying, haven't you got jet lag? And I said, I've got so much jet lag, I don't know what's going on. Anyway, we stop in Cambridge, and we're sitting there, and I always talk to whoever's next to me. I have a sort of compulsion to talk to people, because you never know what, you might fall in love with them, anything might happen. And I was talking to this man, and he said to me, and I said to him, this is the game of Persian kings. And he said, oh yes. And he said, oh, we had a Persian princess here recently. And I said, oh, another one, not just me. And he said, yes, Simone Poonawalla. So he said, I said, of course I know Simone. And he said, oh, she worked here with Patrick Hogan, who's the big sort of horse breeder. And he said, oh, we all know Zoroastrians. He said, we certainly know about them. They're the best horse breeders in the world. Now, I want to tell Jimmy this morning when he was talking about, when he came in and made me laugh my head off, as a Zoroastrian on a horse, the Romans never conquered Persia. And let me tell you why they never conquered Persia. Because we were such brilliant horse people. The Romans didn't really know how to deal with horses. They were killer army on their feet. And what the Persians used to do is they would train their children from a young age to be great horse people, and they would ride forward towards the Romans. And then suddenly, they would all turn at the same time and start rushing backwards on their horses. And the Romans thought that they would flee. And then when they got just far enough, they would turn around 90 degrees and shoot at the Romans. They were able, at 90 degrees, to shoot their bows. And the Romans decided that they would leave that as the borders of their empire. They didn't want to mess with the Zoroastrians. And the one thing that my grandfather used to tell me, that was very distressing, was that, that one of the terrible things when they were conquered in Iran was they weren't allowed to ride horses. And even a donkey could go through the market, but not a Zoroastrian. They'd have to go outside the market. It was such terrible persecution. And I often asked him, I said, how did you live through that? And I won't tell him the answer.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, fourth right fielder is absolutely very, very funny. She's had a very, very interesting life. Mrs. Zerbanoo Gifford, ladies and gentlemen. Couldn't have asked for a better legacy session to open up the day to with. Any questions for Mrs. Gifford? This is your chance. Razzie.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. Just want to ask, how did he live through that? Could you please finish your story? So how did
Oh
he?
yes, before I finish my story, I've been told that I've forgotten to tell you something. One of the things I always say to any audience, especially young audiences, when I'm wheeled out of the ASHA Centre, is that I wish somebody told me when I was young to write my obituary. Now, what I want you all to do as a favour from me, I've got a book, and it's going to be given to you all. I want your name, your email, and I want you to write very short, what is going to be your legacy? What are you going to tell our master when you meet him? My legacy is a soundbite. It's empowering the powerless and enlightening the powerful. Now I want you to think about your legacy now. And then I'm going to read that book in about 2 or 3 years, and I'm going to be keeping in contact with you all, and I'm going to see whether you've done what you wanted to do. So that's one thing I would like you to do just for me as a favour. Now the question was what?
So you were almost done telling your story, and so yeah, really curious to know how he dealt with not being able to.
I don't know, I mean, they were just made of their DNA, which we have their DNA, and I often, when I hear people talk about boat people or refugees or dissidents, and I feel a little bit sort of sad because I think, well, I come from a DNA stock that was dissident. You know, we kept our religion going in Iran, and it was so terrible. Mona Papa used to say that he never experienced rain. And I said, what do you mean you never experienced rain? He said, we weren't allowed, Armenians, Jews, and Zoroastrians weren't allowed to go out when it rained because rain only fell on believers. They weren't allowed to inherit. So that was a way of getting people to convert to Islam. And he said, it was so terrible because in every family, somebody would have to convert to Islam to inherit our wealth. And there's just so many stories. But I mean, I think it's a defiance, and that's surely something I learned from Frida's book about myself. I thought I was naughty. I knew I was very naughty, but I learned how defiant I was. That when I see that there's something wrong, I won't give in, even when I know that I'm going to lose, because I think you have to make a stand. And Dad used to always say to us, you know, a great deal of talent is lost to the world for want of a little courage. I think we have a lot of courage. Of course, my grandfather was one of seven brothers. The eldest went to Tehran, and at that time, the Shah's father started liberalizing, and he bought a lot of land in North Tehran, which is now worth a lot of money, and he built the Firuzgah Hospital. And any Iranians, if I say to them, Firuzgah Hospital, they all actually do this to me as a sort of thank you, because they know that it was built by a Zoroastrian for everybody. My grandfather walked Iran, and you read the whole story in the biography. Yes, and Amazon. Okay, Amazon. My grandfather never went to the Amazon. I've been to the Amazon, but please will you spread the message as socially aware people to ask your friends to order the book on Amazon. One of the things we want to see whether we can do is try and make it into a bestseller, this book. It's not just a biography on my life, it's a collective biography on the community. And a lot of the book is about the community in Zoroastrians. And people always say to me, wherever I go, we know nothing about Zoroastrians. Now, the way to get a book sold is for people to write reviews on Amazon and to order the book on Amazon and to do blogs. So if you, as socially aware young people, do that, it will help, and it will get the message out about how we were treated in our history, and I would be really grateful. And it also to be a very interesting collective thing for us to do, because I feel that we go to lots of conferences and we do a lot of talking, but Zoroastrians are about doing. You know, there's got to be a reason that you've come all this way here to do something, and this would be something wonderful if we could do it collectively together.
Any more questions? We'll just take one more question if we've got one.
You talk a lot about your life and the journey that you've been through, and obviously a lot of challenges that you faced when you were younger. Would you say that you drew upon a religion as a young person to find strength and resilience, or was it more the people that were around you and the circumstances you were in at the time that helped you get through it?
A mix of it all. There's no doubt I can't help my DNA. I mean, I think we're all spiritual warriors, and we can't help ourselves. I had fantastic parents and fantastic cousins, aunts, uncles, everybody. I was brought up in a collective environment. My parents used to work very hard at the hotel. So in the summer holidays from school, I used to always go to India and would be with my cousins. So I feel I was brought up by the wider community. And I've had so many failures and disappointments, and it doesn't really matter. You know, my mother always says to me, the day comes and the day goes, and it's how you take it, you know, and there's always a reason. There's always a reason why you don't get what you want at the time that you want it. And then you look back and you realise, well, I didn't need it at that time. In fact, I need it now, and that's something that I've learned from Frida and from the book, the interconnectedness of life. And there's, you know, only God knows, and He knows the whole plan. It's all so well charted that you don't have to worry. It's, if you have hardships and disappointments and things don't go your way, there's a reason. You're being protected from something, and you will be given an opportunity again. Opportunities are always there, but the thing that you have to do is you have to live life openly. You have to be spontaneous and loving, and just think. Be thoughtful of your thoughts, because they go into the ether. Be thoughtful of what you say to people and how kind you are to them. And really leave a legacy. And I mean, we do. I mean, I could go on, you know, till tomorrow morning about people like Dadabai Nauroji, who I've written about, who was an inspiration to me in politics and how he was treated. And 100 years later, I was treated the same. I could talk to you about people like Rutten, who's written the back of the biography, J.R.D. Tata. I could talk to you about my mentor, Soli Godrich, who I adored, and his Wildlife Trust. I mean, there's so many extraordinary Zoroastrians. And, you know, I've spent time with them, been with them, I've written about them. And we have this extraordinary heritage that's there, and it's in your DNA. You can't get rid of it, you can't deny it. And we're so privileged, and I just wish that we could, you know, have all the young people together from around the world, and I could just tell them about all the individual Zoroastrians I've met and what they've done. You know, in Calcutta, for example, I went to Calcutta, the only school for deaf children, started by Dan Aidenwaller, a Zoroastrian. You know, wherever you go, they're somehow there. I mean, when we talked about Zane this morning, I'd forgotten Zane Dalal. Well, Zane was an organ scholar at Oxford. I remember going and listening to him, and I'd just gone to a concert, and it turned out to be Zane playing, and then we became buddies, and I went and stayed with him in America. But you know, if you're open to life, open to the people next to you, and treat them all, they're all actually Zoroastrians, because all their faith, everybody of faith, actually has all the principles that we believe in. And our prophet gave us actually the most up-to-date religion. It might be the ancient religion, but in fact it's the most up-to-date. And it's about conservation, it's about equality, it's about behaving yourself properly and leaving a great legacy of goodness.